I've always enjoyed nighttime drives. There's something calming about an empty road under the cover of darkness. No traffic, no distractions, just you, the hum of the engine, and the quiet. Tonight was one of those nights, and I was driving through some of the more remote roads outside of town. The road twisted through dense woods on either side, the trees almost reaching over the road to form a canopy that blocked out what little moonlight there was. Just me and the road, alone in the silence. It had been a long day at work, and a late-night drive felt like the perfect way to unwind. I wasn't in a rush. I let the windows down to breathe in the cool night air, feeling the breeze and enjoying the solitude. I had a long stretch of road ahead, which was just fine by me. I liked the idea of getting lost in my thoughts, letting the road take me wherever it wanted. But after a while, something began to feel different. Maybe it was just the stillness of the woods, but there was a strange feeling in the air, something unsettling. It was like the trees were watching, and every now and then I'd catch something in the corner of my eye. Just a flicker, like a shadow that shouldn't have been there. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, telling myself it was just the shadows playing tricks on me. But then I saw him. Standing at the edge of the road, barely visible in the weak headlights, was a figure, just standing there facing me. I slowed down, trying to get a better look, and saw that he was a man, probably in his 40s, wearing an old-fashioned suit. His head was tilted down, making it hard to see his face clearly. For some reason, my heart skipped a beat. It didn't feel right. There was something about him that made me want to keep driving, to just pass him by and forget I ever saw him. But curiosity got the better of me. I slowed down, my headlights illuminating him just a little more, and realized he was staring at me, his face still shadowed, but his eyes locked onto mine, piercing right through the windshield. His expression was cold, unreadable, but those eyes, they seemed familiar. That's when it hit me, and a chill ran down my spine. I was looking at the face of Albert Fish, the infamous cannibal and killer from decades ago, the man who had terrorized families and left a legacy of fear behind him. I knew his face from documentaries, books, old photographs that seemed to carry his ghost right through the pages. But here he was, in the flesh, looking at me as if he'd just stepped out of some twisted memory. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as panic surged through me. I'd read about him, heard about his horrific acts, but I'd never expected to see him, or anyone like him, out here, in the middle of the night alone on this empty road. I tried to look away to keep driving, but something about his stare wouldn't let me. It was like he was daring me to stop, to step out of the car, to come closer. I felt trapped, like I couldn't break free from his gaze. Then, as quickly as he'd appeared, he was gone, just vanished. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, even looked in my rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. The road was empty, just as it had been a moment before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, watching, hiding in the shadows just beyond the reach of my headlights. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just a hallucination. Maybe I was tired, stressed, or letting my imagination run wild. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. I could still feel his presence, like a lingering shadow watching me. A part of me wanted to turn around, to leave that road and never come back, but something kept me there, like I was caught in some invisible web that wouldn't let me go. With trembling hands, I gripped the wheel and kept driving, my eyes flicking back to the mirrors every few seconds, half expecting to see him again. But there was nothing, just the dark, twisting road stretching out endlessly ahead of me. But I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever had happened, it was far from over. And somehow, I knew Albert Fish wasn't done with me yet. As I continued down the road, my hands were shaking. My heart was still racing, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the image of Albert Fish out of my mind. I glanced into the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see his shadowy figure standing in the road behind me, staring back. But it was just an empty stretch of highway, lined with dark trees and an unsettling silence. I tried to calm myself down, convincing myself it had to be a trick of the light or some leftover memory from a documentary I'd watched about him. but the feeling of dread wouldn't leave me. It clung to me, thick and heavy like the scent of smoke after a fire. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what. The road stretched on, endless and empty, and the only sound was the steady hum of the engine. I hadn't passed another car in over 15 minutes, and there were no houses, no streetlights, just darkness. But then, as I rounded a bend, something else appeared on the road up ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the lane. I slowed down, my pulse quickening as the figure came into view. This time, it wasn't Albert Fish. It was someone else, someone younger, wearing jeans and a simple gray hoodie. He had his head down, his face hidden by the shadows, and he wasn't moving, just standing there, right in the middle of the road. I didn't want to stop. Every instinct told me to keep driving, to avoid whatever this was. But something compelled me to pull over. I rolled down my window just a crack, enough to speak but not enough to let anyone reach inside. "Hey!" I called out, my voice shaking a little. "Are you okay? Do you need a ride?" The figure didn't respond at first. He just stood there unmoving. And then, slowly, he lifted his head. When his face came into the dim light from my headlights, I froze. His face looked hollow, pale, almost ghostly, and his eyes were wide with something that looked like terror. He stepped closer, his movements slow, almost robotic. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Are you lost?" He looked at me for a long moment, his face still blank, and then he spoke. His voice was low and shaky, barely more than a whisper. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I glanced around, suddenly aware of the thick forest pressing in on both sides of the road. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're watching you," he replied, his voice cracking as he spoke. "They know you saw him." My heart skipped a beat. "Who's watching me? What are you talking about?" He shook his head almost like he was fighting with himself and took another step closer. "You saw him, didn't you? The man with the dead eyes. Albert Fish." I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. How could he know that? I hadn't told anyone. I didn't even know who this stranger was or how he knew about my encounter just moments ago. Panic was building in my chest, my thoughts racing. I needed to get out of there, away from this stranger and whatever was happening on this road. But before I could put the car in gear, he leaned forward, his face only inches from my window. His eyes were dark, almost empty, and when he spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "You can't run," he said. "He'll find you, no matter where you go." And with that, he stepped back into the darkness, vanishing into the shadows without another word. I rolled up the window, my hands shaking, my breath coming in short, quick gasps. I felt like I'd just stepped into a nightmare, and no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was following me. I pressed down on the gas, speeding down the road, desperate to put as much distance as I could between myself and that stranger. But his words echoed in my mind, sending a shiver down my spine. "He'll find you, no matter where you go." As I drove, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the stranger standing there in the road, or worse, to see Albert Fish's face again, staring back at me with those cold, dead eyes. But the road was empty. Just me, the darkness, and that feeling of being watched, of being hunted. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. By the time I reached my destination, a remote cabin I'd rented for a weekend of solitude, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. My hands were still trembling, and the stranger's words echoed in my mind. "He'll find you, no matter where you go." I tried to convince myself that he was just some disturbed guy on the side of the road, but the fear wouldn't leave me. The cabin sat alone at the edge of a dense forest, miles away from the nearest town. It was quiet, isolated, the kind of place where you're meant to disconnect from the world and unwind. But tonight, that isolation didn't feel peaceful. It felt vulnerable. I parked the car and grabbed my bag, stepping out into the cold night air. The wind rustled through the trees, and the only light came from the faint glow of the cabin's porch light. As I made my way to the door, every shadow seemed to shift. Every sound felt like a whisper. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the woods. Finally, I made it inside, locking the door behind me and double-checking it, just in case. The cabin was small and simple, a single room with a fireplace, a bed, and a tiny kitchenette. I dropped my bag by the door and sank into a chair, trying to calm my nerves. The silence felt heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. But at least I was safe in here. Or so I thought. I tried to relax, turning on the fireplace and letting its warmth fill the room. The flames flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. I kept telling myself that everything would be fine, that this was all in my head. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Just a flicker, a shadow shifting across the wall. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. I let out a shaky breath, convincing myself it was just the fire playing tricks. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew something was wrong. And then, just as I was about to lie down and try to sleep, I heard it, a faint knocking at the door. My heart froze. It was late, and I was miles away from anyone. There was no reason for someone to be out here. But the knocking continued, slow and steady, each knock sending a chill down my spine. I stayed where I was, barely daring to breathe, hoping that whoever it was would just go away. But then a voice came from the other side of the door, a voice that made my blood run cold. "Let me in." The voice was soft, almost pleading, but there was something wrong with it. Something hollow. It sounded like a whisper, but there was a desperation to it, a sense of something far darker lurking beneath the surface. "Please, let me in." I gripped the arms of the chair, my knuckles turning white. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare respond. But the knocking continued, each tap growing louder, more insistent. I got up slowly, moving toward the door as quietly as I could, peering through the peephole. And there, standing on the other side, was the same man from the road, the stranger with the hollow eyes and the warning. "Please," he whispered, his face inches from the door. "You have to let me in. He's coming. He'll find you if you don't let me in." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. The fear was overwhelming, but so was the confusion. How had he found me here? How had he known where I'd gone? I can't help you," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't leave. He just stood there, staring at me through the peephole, his eyes wide with terror. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling. "He's already here. He's watching us, right now." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I looked around the cabin, my eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. The air felt thick, heavy with a presence I couldn't see but could feel all around me. Then, without warning, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. I stayed where I was, waiting, my heart hammering in my chest. Minutes passed, stretching out like hours until I finally gathered the courage to open the door. The porch was empty. The man was gone. Only the quiet of the night greeted me, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left. I shut the door quickly, locking it again, and backed away, unable to shake the feeling that something was in the cabin with me. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that the man was gone, that I was safe now. But as I turned to look around the room, my eyes caught something in the window. A face, pressed against the glass, staring in at me. It was him, Albert Fish. The cold, dead eyes I had seen on the road were staring at me through the window, filled with a twisted, hungry expression. I stumbled back, my body frozen in fear as his face pressed closer, his mouth curling into a dark, hollow smile. I closed my eyes, hoping that when I opened them, he would be gone. But when I looked again, he was still there, watching me, his face distorted by the glass, his eyes boring into mine. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished, leaving only the darkness and my own reflection staring back. I backed away from the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps, every nerve in my body on edge. I knew deep down that I wasn't alone, that somehow he had found me just as the stranger had warned. And I knew this was far from over. I couldn't sleep. I tried, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Albert Fish staring at me through the window. That twisted smile burned into my mind. I paced the small cabin, my nerves shot, every shadow seeming to move and shift as I passed. I kept telling myself that it wasn't real, that it was just stress, exhaustion. But I couldn't convince myself. I sat down in the corner of the room, trying to calm my racing heart, to push away the creeping sense of dread. But the quiet was overwhelming, the silence pressing down on me until every tiny sound became amplified. A creak of the floorboards, the wind rattling the windows. Each noise made me jump, my eyes darting to every corner of the room. Then just as I was starting to calm down, I heard it. A soft scraping sound, coming from the window. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It sounded like nails dragging against the glass, slow and deliberate. My heart pounded as I forced myself to look toward the window, praying it was just a branch brushing against the glass. But there was nothing. Just the darkness outside, and the faint outline of the trees swaying in the wind. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm myself, but as I turned away from the window, I heard it again. The same slow, scraping sound, this time louder, closer. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and slowly, I turned back to the window, and there he was again. Albert Fish, his face pressed against the glass, his eyes wide, watching me, his lips curled into that same horrifying smile, as if he knew exactly what kind of fear he was inflicting. I stumbled back, my hand covering my mouth to keep from screaming. I wanted to run, to get as far away from that window as possible, but I was frozen, trapped in place by his gaze. He lifted his hand, pressing it against the glass, and began dragging his fingers down slowly, his nails scraping against the glass. The sound was horrible, high-pitched and grating, like nails on a chalkboard. I felt my skin crawl, every hair on my body standing on end. I wanted to close my eyes, to look away, but I couldn't. It was like he had me under some kind of spell, holding me there, forcing me to watch as he dragged his nails across the window, his twisted smile growing wider. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the furniture as I backed away from the window. I turned to the door, my only thought to get out of the cabin, to run as far away as I could. But when I reached for the door handle, I found it locked. I yanked at it, twisting the handle, pulling as hard as I could, but it wouldn't budge. A feeling of dread washed over me, and I realized with growing horror that I was trapped. And then, from behind me, I heard a voice, low, raspy, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. "You can't leave." I spun around, my eyes searching the room, but there was no one there. Just the empty cabin, silent and still. I tried to convince myself that I was hearing things, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I knew he was here, somewhere, watching me. And then, I saw it, scrawled across the walls in dark, dripping letters as if someone had painted it in blood. "Let me in." The words stretched across the wall, twisting and curling like they were alive, like they were moving. I backed away, my heart pounding, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and when I opened them, the words were still there, mocking me, taunting me. I could feel my sanity slipping, my grip on reality fraying at the edges. I backed into the corner, hugging my knees to my chest, my eyes glued to the wall, unable to look away from those words. "Let me in," the voice whispered again, closer this time, like it was coming from right beside me. I squeezed my eyes shut, covering my ears, trying to block out the sound. But it didn't stop. The voice kept repeating over and over, each time more desperate, more insistent. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." The air around me grew colder, the temperature dropping until I could see my breath misting in front of me. The walls seemed to close in, the cabin growing darker, the shadows stretching out, reaching toward me. I was trapped, surrounded, with nowhere to go. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. The room fell silent again, the oppressive weight lifting just enough for me to catch my breath. I opened my eyes, slowly, cautiously, afraid of what I might see. The words on the wall were gone. The room was empty, and there was no sign of him, no sign of Albert Fish, or the stranger, or anyone else. It was as if nothing had happened, but I knew better. I knew he was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his chance. I sat there in the dark, waiting, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I knew this was far from over. I didn't know how or why, but I knew he was coming for me. And somehow, I knew I wouldn't be able to stop him. I don't know how long I sat there in the corner, huddled up and shaking. The silence in the cabin was thick, almost suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. Every faint sound was magnified, echoing in my mind until it was all I could hear. I tried to convince myself it was over, that maybe the nightmare had passed. But then, in the quiet, I heard something. Footsteps, soft and measured, coming from the hallway that led to the cabin's back room. I knew I was alone in that cabin, or at least I thought I was. The footsteps grew louder, closer, each one sending a jolt of terror through me. I forced myself to stand, my legs weak and unsteady, and backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the dark hallway. The footsteps stopped, and for a brief moment, everything was silent again. But the silence was worse, filling the air with tension so thick I could hardly breathe. And then, from the darkness of the hallway, a figure began to emerge, stepping forward slowly, deliberately. It was him, Albert Fish. His face as twisted and horrifying as I remembered, his dead eyes locked onto mine with a look of pure malice. But there was something different this time, something darker, more sinister. He looked less human, like he was made of shadow and smoke, his form flickering and shifting as he moved closer. I backed up until I hit the wall, my mind screaming at me to run, to escape. But there was nowhere to go. I was trapped. He stopped a few feet away from me, his twisted smile spreading across his face, and raised his hand, pointing straight at me. His voice, low and guttural, filled the room, echoing off the walls. "You should have let me in," he said, his tone dripping with malice. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. I wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but no words came. I could only watch as he took another step closer, his form flickering, twisting, like he was barely holding himself together. And then, just as he was about to reach me, I felt a sudden surge of heat, a warmth that cut through the cold, the fear. It was coming from my chest, spreading out like a protective shield. I looked down, confused, and saw the faint glow of light shining from beneath my shirt. My hand instinctively went to my chest, and I felt something hard and warm, a locket I'd been wearing, a keepsake from my grandmother. The light grew brighter, filling the room, pushing back the darkness. Albert Fish's face twisted in rage, his form flickering wildly as he backed away, his eyes burning with hatred. "No!" he snarled, his voice filled with fury. "You can't stop me. I will find you. I will always find you." The light from the locket grew brighter still, filling the entire room with a brilliant glow. Fish's form began to fade, dissolving into smoke and shadow, his screams echoing through the cabin as he was pulled back into the darkness. I watched, breathless, as his figure vanished completely, leaving only the empty, silent room. The warmth faded, the light dimming until it was gone, leaving me standing alone in the darkness once more. I stumbled back, my mind racing, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. But I didn't have time to think. I knew I had to get out of that cabin, to leave that place behind and never look back. I grabbed my keys, bolted to the door, and ran out into the night, not stopping until I reached my car. I could still feel his presence lurking in the shadows, watching me, but I didn't dare look back. I drove away as fast as I could, the cabin disappearing in my rearview mirror, the road stretching out ahead of me. But no matter how far I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still with me, lurking just beyond the reach of the headlights. I looked down at the locket, its metal cool against my skin now, and wondered if it had really saved me, or if it had only delayed the inevitable. I knew, deep down, that Albert Fish was not gone, that he would find me again, and the next time, I might not be so lucky. Days passed, but the terror of that night in the cabin clung to me like a shadow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that twisted smile, those dead, unblinking eyes. I tried to convince myself it was over, that Albert Fish had been banished. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before he returned. I was back home, far from the cabin and the desolate road, surrounded by the safety of familiar walls. But even here, I felt his presence lurking, just beyond my reach, like a dark cloud waiting to descend. Every creak, every whisper of the wind seemed to carry his voice, a faint, mocking whisper in the back of my mind. "You should have let me in." I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, haunted by the memory of him, by the feeling that he was watching, waiting. The locket, my only source of comfort, hung around my neck, its metal cool against my skin. I hadn't taken it off since that night, hoping it would keep him away. But each day, the feeling of safety grew weaker, and the darkness grew stronger. And then, one night, it happened. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping, coming from somewhere inside the house. I sat up, my heart racing, my eyes scanning the dark room. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the quiet house. I forced myself out of bed, my legs weak, my hands trembling. I crept through the dark, following the sound down the hallway, my footsteps barely making a sound. The tapping led me to the living room, where it grew louder, more urgent, filling the silence with a hollow, haunting rhythm. And then, I saw him. Albert Fish, standing in the middle of the room, his twisted smile stretched across his face, his eyes glinting with a dark, malevolent joy. He looked more real, more solid than before, like he was no longer just a ghost or a memory, but something far more dangerous. He tilted his head, his gaze locked onto mine, and his smile grew wider. "I told you, you can't escape me." I stumbled back, my heart pounding, the locket feeling suddenly heavy around my neck. I could feel its warmth, faint but growing stronger, pushing back the fear that threatened to consume me. I knew this was my last chance, the final confrontation. If I didn't stop him now, he would haunt me forever. Summoning every ounce of courage, I clutched the locket, feeling its warmth spread through my hand, and stepped forward, meeting his gaze. "You're not real," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "You're nothing but a memory, a shadow." His smile faded, replaced by a look of cold, burning rage. He took a step toward me, his form flickering, twisting, like he was struggling to hold himself together. "I am very real," he hissed, his voice filled with malice. "And I will always find you." But I stood my ground, clutching the locket tighter, its light growing brighter, filling the room with a warm, protective glow. Fish recoiled, his form flickering wildly, his face contorted with fury. "No!" he screamed, his voice a guttural snarl. "You cannot banish me. I am eternal." I closed my eyes, focusing on the warmth, on the memory of my grandmother who had given me the locket, the one thing that had protected me from him. I could feel her presence, her strength, pushing back the darkness, filling me with a calm, steady courage. When I opened my eyes, the light from the locket had grown blinding, filling every corner of the room, casting out the shadows. Fish's form twisted, distorted, his face contorted in agony as the light consumed him. "No!" he shrieked, his voice fading, growing weaker until it was nothing more than a whisper. "I will come back. I will find you." And then, with one final desperate scream, he was gone, his form dissolving into smoke and shadow, leaving only the empty room and the faint glow of the locket. I collapsed to the floor, the weight of fear and relief washing over me. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. The house was silent, peaceful, filled with a warmth I hadn't felt in days. I looked down at the locket, its glow fading, its warmth steady. A final gift from someone who had always protected me, even from beyond. I knew that Albert Fish was gone, banished by the light, by the strength of someone who loved me. But even as the days passed, even as I returned to my life, a small part of me couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. I haven't driven down that road since, and I never will. But sometimes in the quiet of the night, when the world is still and the shadows stretch long, I think I hear a voice, faint and distant, whispering in the darkness. You should have let me in.